Your boyfriend is sleeping with my wife.
The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor before Elizabeth Okonkwo even realized it had left her hand. 1 second, it was in her fingers. Cool, expensive, the kind of crystal that caught light and turned it gold. The next second, it was gone, exploded into 100 glittering pieces at her heels, like her body had already processed the information and responded before her mind had caught up. Every head on the rooftop turned. The jazz trio paused for half a beat. 30 of Seoul's most powerful people looked toward the sound, then quickly looked away, the way wealthy people always do when something inconvenient happens nearby. Elizabeth didn't move. She couldn't, because the man standing beside her, tall, Korean, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, had just pressed his lips close to her ear and said 5 words in a voice so quiet and so certain it felt less like speech and more like surgery. Your boyfriend is sleeping with my wife. It rang in her ears. She turned to look at him. Her heart was slamming, her hands were shaking. But her face? Lord, her face was still. 34 years of being the only black woman in every room had trained her face into something unreadable, and it did not fail her now, even as her entire world was rearranging itself around those 5 words. "Who are you?" she asked. "Kang Seo-jin." He picked up a fresh glass from a passing tray and held it out to her, as if offering champagne after detonating a grenade was perfectly normal. "I own this building, among other things." She did not take the glass. "How long?" 4 months. His eyes didn't waver. Dark, still, the kind of eyes that had seen too much to flinch at anything. "I thought you deserved to know. Most people in my position don't bother. I'm not most people." 4 months. Elizabeth stood there and let those 2 words pass through her body like cold water. 4 months of Marcus Webb kissing her goodbye in the morning. 4 months of dinner reservations and weekend trips to Jeju and "I love you, Liz," whispered into her hair at night. 4 months of a performance so practiced and so thorough, she had never once felt the draft from the door he'd left open. She looked at the broken glass on the floor. A waiter was already moving toward it with a cloth. "Thank you," she said to Kang Seo-jin. Her voice came out steady. She hated and loved herself for that in equal measure. Then she walked to the elevator, pressed the button, stepped inside, and waited until the doors closed completely before she let her knees buckle, catching herself on the brass railing with both hands and breathing, just breathing, in the merciless privacy of her own reflection. If that hit you, like it hit Elizabeth, smash that like button right now. Subscribe and hit the bell because this story is going to destroy you in the best way possible. And drop a comment. What would you have done in her position? Let's talk. Marcus Webb was not home when she got back to the Itaewon apartment. He'd texted something about clients, something smooth and rehearsed, the kind of lie that comes easy when you've been telling it long enough. Elizabeth read the message once, set her phone face down on the granite counter, and stood in the middle of the living room they shared, and looked at it like she was seeing it for the first time. She was. That was the thing about betrayal. It didn't just change what was coming. It reached backward and rewrote everything that had already happened. Every memory she had of this apartment now had a second layer, a shadow version she hadn't been able to see until this moment. Marcus choosing the art on the walls. Marcus deciding which neighborhood. Marcus suggesting she leave her gallery director position in Atlanta to explore something new in Seoul. Marcus. And she had followed. Because she loved him. Because she trusted him. Because she had believed with everything in her that they were building something together. She had been building something. Just not what she thought. She opened the bedroom closet and pulled down the suitcase from the top shelf, the one she'd packed herself in Atlanta, the one with the small red ribbon tied to the handle so she could spot it at baggage claim. She set it on the bed and opened it and began to pack. Methodically, quietly, with the particular focus of a woman who had decided that the next thing she did would not be chaos. Her grandmother, Nana Ngozi, used to say, When a man shows you who he is, don't argue with him about it. Just go. Arguing can happen from anywhere. Your dignity cannot be repaired once it falls on the floor. Elizabeth thought of Nanangozi as she folded her clothes. She packed her grandmother's photograph, the one she kept on the nightstand, the one Marcus used to say was watching him. She packed her sketchbooks, her brushes, her 3 favorite scarves, and the small clay pot Nanangozi had pressed into her hands at the airport in Houston 2 years ago and said, "Take this, so the new place knows you have roots." She left everything that was his. She left everything that was theirs. She only took what was purely, entirely, unmistakably hers. She was out of the apartment in 40 minutes. She did not leave a note. The hotel in Mapogu was small and clean and smelled like cedarwood. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions, just handed over a keycard with both hands and a quiet bow. Elizabeth rode the elevator to the 4th floor, let herself into a room barely big enough for a bed and a desk, set her suitcase down, and called Adana. Adana picked up on the 2nd ring. It was early evening in Lagos. She could hear traffic in the background. "Talk to me," Adana said immediately. "Not hello, not what's wrong, just talk to me." The particular frequency of a friend who knows. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the hotel bed in her gown, the gold one she'd worn to the gala, the one that now felt like a costume from someone else's life, and she talked. She told Adana everything. The gala, the man, the whisper, the glass, the 40-minute packing session, the hotel room, all of it, in order, without crying, because she had not yet found the place inside herself where the tears were, and she wasn't ready to look for it yet. Adana was quiet for a long moment when she finished. "Are you safe?" she asked first. "Yes." "Are you whole?" Elizabeth considered this seriously. "I think I'm finding out which parts of me were mine to begin with." "Good," Adana said, and her voice had that particular firmness in it that meant she was about to say something true. "Elizabeth, that man did not break you. He exposed himself. There is a difference. And that stranger at the gala, whoever he is, he did not hurt you. He handed you a key. What you do with it is yours." Elizabeth hung up at 2 in the morning. She changed out of the gold dress. She hung it in the tiny closet. She would decide later whether it deserved to be kept or burned. And she lay on top of the hotel bed cover and stared at the ceiling and made a list in her head of everything she needed to do next. By 6 the next morning, she had found an apartment online. A studio in Mapogu with south-facing windows and bare white walls, and a street below where an old woman sold hot chocolate from a cart every morning. She sent the deposit from her personal account, the one Marcus had never touched, the one she'd maintained quietly since Atlanta, like a woman who had always half known, on some level below the surface of loving him, that she might someday need an exit. The landlord confirmed within the hour. She could move in that afternoon. She blocked Marcus on everything. Phone, email, Kakao Talk, Instagram, every door, bolted. Every window, sealed. She did it. Without ceremony, one account at a time, the way you might go through a house after a storm and close all the shutters. Not in panic, but in the quiet, purposeful knowledge that the weather has changed, and you are the one who has to decide what gets in now. Then she went and bought canvases. 6 of them. And brushes. And paint. Black, burnt orange, deep indigo, raw umber. She carried them home in a paper bag to her new apartment, with its bare walls and its hot talk smell, and its total, gorgeous blankness. She set the canvases against the wall and looked at them for a long time. Then she picked up a brush for the first time in 2 years, and she began. The first painting was almost entirely black. One slash of burnt orange across the center, raw and unpolished, like a scar that hadn't finished deciding what it was going to be. She stood back from it when the paint was dry and looked at it and felt something shift in her chest, something loosening, like a knot that had been there so long she'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. She called it displacement, not grief, not rage, displacement, the precise word for what happens when something is moved from where it belongs. The second day was harder than the first. The first day had been fueled by adrenaline and purpose. and the clarifying electricity of a decision made. The second day was just a Tuesday. She woke up in the hotel room in Mapogu, and for exactly 3 seconds, she forgot. 3 seconds where everything was normal, the smell of cedar, the sound of the street below, the gray soul morning. And then it landed again, the full weight of it, and she lay there breathing under the ceiling and let it. She had a system for mornings like this. Nanangozi had taught it to her during the hard year when Elizabeth was 22, and the world had first showed its teeth in a way she wasn't prepared for. 5 things, Nanangozi had said on the phone from Houston, before you get out of bed. 5 things that are true. Not good things, just true things. Things that exist regardless of what's happening to you. Elizabeth had been doing it ever since. The ceiling is white. That was 1. The street below has a woman selling hot dog. 2. My grandmother is alive and she loves me. 3. I have money in my personal account. 4. I have not lost myself. I have found out where I was keeping myself this whole time. 5. She got up. She bought a coffee from the convenience store and stood outside in the cold morning air of Mapogu and drank it and watched the neighborhood wake up around her. This was not her neighborhood yet, but it would be. She could already feel the particular way a place begins to fit around you when you let it. Not like something bought, but like something grown into. Slow and permanent. She went back inside. She opened her laptop. She emailed 3 galleries in Seoul that she had been putting off contacting for months. During the months when Marcus's subtle friction had made her ambitions feel somehow excessive, somehow too large for the life they were building together. She wrote the emails in 40 minutes, attached her portfolio, pressed send. Then she sat back and looked at what she'd done, and felt something she barely recognized. Forward. It felt like forward. 9 days after the gala, on a Tuesday night when the rain was coming down sideways against her studio windows, Elizabeth did something she hadn't planned. She picked up her phone and texted Kang Seo-jin. She still had his number from the brief exchange they'd had when he'd sent a car to retrieve the wrap she'd left at the gala. She'd returned it the next morning with a note that said only, "Thank you for the truth." He'd texted back, "Keep the wrap." She hadn't responded then. Now she typed, "Who do you think a painting is for? The artist or the person looking at it?" She stared at what she'd written, then hit send before she could talk herself out of it. 3 minutes passed. Then his reply came, "The painting is for whoever needs it most. Sometimes those are the same person." She read it 3 times. She didn't reply that night, but she thought about it while she painted, and the second canvas, the one she started that same evening, had something different in it. Still dark, still raw, but there was a shape emerging in the center, something that wasn't quite a figure, and wasn't quite an absence, but was unmistakably alive. She called it What the Dark Remembers. She met him again by accident, or what Seoul allows you to call accident, 12 days after the gala. It was past 11 at night, and she was buying ramyeon from the convenience store on the ground floor of her building, when she noticed the pojangmatcha stall across the narrow street. It was a small tent setup, the kind that materialized in Seoul neighborhoods after dark, like they'd always been there, with orange light spilling out and the smell of taeteokbokki and fish cake broth cutting through the rain-cold air. She noticed the stall because of the old woman running it. Tiny, precise, moving between the pots, with the efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing 10,000 times. And then she noticed the man sitting at the end of the low counter with his jacket folded over the stool beside him, and his sleeves pushed to the elbows, eating like a man who had nowhere else to be. Kang Seo-jin, without the suit jacket, without the rooftop, without whatever carefully maintained atmosphere he normally moved through. He looked more real. That was it. He looked like a real person eating late-night street food instead of an architect of Seoul's shadow world. He looked up and saw her standing with her ramyeon bag, and they both went very still. The old woman behind the counter, his grandmother, she would learn, looked between them with the sharp, unhurried assessment of someone who had survived enough decades to recognize a significant moment when it was happening in front of her pojangmatcha. Then she reached for a bowl, set it on the counter next to Seo-jin's, and ladled tteokbokki into it without a word. Elizabeth crossed the street. She sat down. The old woman set chopsticks in front of her and went back to her pots. "Your grandmother?" Elizabeth asked. "Halmione," Seo-jin said. "She would tell you herself, but she's decided to pretend she doesn't notice you. It's her version of being polite to strangers." Elizabeth looked at the old woman, who was demonstrably not looking back. "She set a bowl for me before I even crossed the street." "Yes," Seo-jin said. "She does that." They ate in silence for a while. The rain was softening. The street was empty except for a cat moving between the orange light and the shadows. "How are you doing?" he asked, not performing concern, just asking. "I'm painting again," she said. "I hadn't painted in 2 years. I started the night after the gala." Something moved across his face. "What kind of painting?" "Honest ones," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to see them." "Maybe," she said. And she meant it. She found out more about Kang Seo-jin in the following 2 weeks, not because he offered it. He didn't. Not easily. But because Seoul talked about him the way cities talk about their necessary shadows. He'd built his empire from the ground up, starting in legitimate real estate development in neighborhoods that other developers had written off, turning waste into value with an instinct for transformation that was, in its own way, a kind of art. The other side of what he did, the part that made people step carefully when his name came up in certain conversations, was never spoken about directly. Just implied, the way a cold room implies a draft without ever showing you the open window. His wife, Ji-yeon, had come from one of those strategic alliances that powerful families arrange with the language of love and the logic of merger. They had been married for 7 years. They had been strangers to each other for most of it. They had been polite strangers, careful strangers, strangers who attended the right events and posed for the right photographs and maintained the right apartment in Gangnam with the right art on the walls. What she'd done with Marcus, that had not been love. That had been 2 lonely people in expensive rooms finding each other like a collision, not a connection. Seo-jin knew this. He had told her so, quietly, in the preliminary separation conversation his lawyers had engineered, with the same precision he applied to everything. "I'm not angry with you," he'd said. "I'm tired. I've been tired for years, and this is as good a reason as any to stop pretending otherwise." Ji-yeon had cried. He hadn't expected that. She said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." And he believed her. That was the most devastating part. He believed her, because he knew she'd never loved him enough to hurt him intentionally. She just loved herself more than the arrangement. And honestly, he couldn't blame her for that either. He visited Elizabeth's studio in Hongdae on a Thursday afternoon without telling her. She had rented a small gallery space there to begin hanging the series. 6 paintings now, growing in power with each edition. He stood at the door and knocked, and she opened it in paint-stained overalls with a brush still in her hand, and said, "How did you find this address?" "I own the building," he said. She stared at him. Then she stepped aside. He walked slowly through the space. He didn't say anything for a long time. He stood in front of what the dark remembers the longest. 2 minutes, maybe 3, which is an eternity in front of a painting. Elizabeth stood back and watched him look at it, which felt more intimate than she was prepared for. "What does the water in this section remember?" he asked finally, pointing to a corner of the canvas where the dark blue bled into something almost translucent, a layer beneath the surface that seemed to hold a shape. Elizabeth felt her breath catch. That was exactly the question she'd been asking herself. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think it remembers the shape of the thing it loved most." He looked at her then, and there was something in his face that was not the controlled, impenetrable composure she'd seen at the gala. There was something human in it. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, like recognition. "I'd like to fund the exhibition," he said. "No," she said immediately. "Why?" "Because I don't know what I'd owe you." He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing. You would owe me nothing, Elizabeth. I'm not offering because I want something in return. I'm offering because—" He stopped, looked back at the painting. Because I think the city needs to see this. And I think you need it to be seen. Those are two different things that happen to point in the same direction. She didn't answer that day. She called Adana from the studio after he left. He wants to fund the exhibition, Elizabeth said. And you said? No. Why? Because I don't know what he wants. Adana's voice was very patient and very clear. Elizabeth, listen to me carefully. A man who asks what your painting remembers is not trying to own you. He is trying to know you. There is a world of difference between those two things, and you, of all people, should recognize it, because no one has tried to know you in a very long time. Elizabeth stood in the empty gallery after she hung up and looked at her paintings, all 6 of them arranged against the walls like confessions. And she stayed there for a long time, alone with the truth of what Adana had said. 3 days later, she called Seo-jin. Okay, she said. Okay, he said, nothing more. No victory in his voice. Just that. She almost trusted him for that. Almost. Are you still here? Good. Because what happens next between Elizabeth and Seo-jin is something you are absolutely not prepared for. Subscribe now and comment below. Do you think she should have texted him? Tell me. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Kang Seo-jin's empire was being tested at exactly the moment he was sitting in her studio thinking about The Shape of Water. The Shin Network had been watching him. They were the kind of organization that moved through Seoul's underbelly like groundwater, always present, rarely visible, waiting for cracks in the surface to seep through. And Seo-jin's very public marital unraveling, the separation filings, the whispers in Gangnam social circles, had looked to them like a crack. A man distracted. A man humanized. A man, for perhaps the first time in his professional life, not fully armored. They'd begun moving against 2 of his real estate holdings in the Yongsan district, using a combination of regulatory pressure and the kind of quiet financial maneuvering that left no fingerprints. Seo-jin's people had flagged it within 48 hours. He'd called the appropriate meeting with the appropriate people and handled it with the particular cold efficiency that had kept him at the top of a very unforgiving hierarchy for a decade. But his number 2, a man named Park Do-jun, who had been with him since the Itaewon years, said something after the meeting that stayed with him. You seem different, Park Do-jun said. Not as an accusation, as an observation. Different how? Seo-jin said. Less certain, Do-jun said carefully. But also, I don't know, like a door opened somewhere that I didn't know was in the building. He paused. The woman from the gala? Seo-jin looked at him for a long moment. Handle the Yongsan situation. Do-jun smiled. Small, knowing. Yes, boss. Seo-jin was not a man who talked about his interior life. He had spent his entire adult existence converting feeling into strategy, converting vulnerability into precision, converting the grief of the boy from Itaewon, whose father owed the wrong people money, into something armored and unstoppable. He had built his empire the way a man builds a wall, not because he loved walls, but because he had learned what happened when there wasn't one. But Elizabeth Okonkwo asked him questions that didn't have strategy in them. She asked him what he ate as a child. She asked whether his grandmother had always had the pojangmacha stall. She asked him once, while they were walking along the Mapo waterfront at 9 in the evening, whether he ever got tired of being the most dangerous person in every room. He stopped walking. Yes, he said. And it came out simpler than he intended. Not crafted, just true. Every single day. She didn't react to that with pity. She didn't soften and reach for him or say something consoling. She just nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. And then she said, "Then stop. Not the empire. I'm not naive, but the performance of it. You don't have to be the most dangerous person in every room. You just have to be the most prepared." He had never, in his adult life, received that particular piece of advice. He turned it over in his mind for a long time afterward, the way you turn over a stone and find something living underneath it. Halmione noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. the way old women who have survived real difficulty always do. She watched him come to the pojangmatcha more often. She watched him sit longer, talk less. She watched the set of his shoulders change in a way she hadn't seen since he was a teenager in her kitchen doing homework at the table, before the world had taught him to carry himself like a fortress. One evening, she spoke to him in Korean, low and direct, while Elizabeth was across the street buying barley tea from the convenience store. That woman is not afraid of you. I know, Halmayoni. Do you understand how rare that is? Not people who pretend not to be afraid. Actually, not afraid. She looks at you like you're a person, Seo Jin. Not a position, not a reputation. A person. She pointed her ladle at him. Do not waste that. Whatever you have to become to deserve it, become it. He did not respond immediately. He sat with it the way he sat with everything that mattered, quietly, not avoiding it, but not rushing it either. He finished his tteokbokki. He drank his barley tea. He waited until Elizabeth came back across the street with her can of tea, and sat down next to him and asked Halmioni something in broken Korean that made the old woman laugh. Actually laugh, a sharp, genuine sound he hadn't heard from her in months. And he thought, this is what a door opening sounds like. He had never told anyone what it cost him to hold things together after his father's situation. Not the money he'd eventually made back and then 100 times over. The cost that had no unit of currency. The cost of becoming someone who didn't need anyone. Of training himself out of the particular human vulnerability of caring what happened next. He had done it so thoroughly and so well that there had been years, whole years, when he'd moved through his life like a machine that had learned to simulate a person. Efficient. Powerful. Completely alone in the way that only people surrounded by others can be truly alone. Ji-yeon had not fixed that. He'd known she wouldn't when they married. The arrangement had been honest, in its way. He hadn't expected to feel the emptiness of it the way he did. He hadn't expected that living beside someone for 7 years, without ever being known by them, could hollow you out in a way that nothing in his professional life ever had. What Marcus Webb had done, the affair, the ugliness of it, had been the end of something that had already been over for years. What it had given him, unexpectedly, was a reason to be in the same room as Elizabeth Okonkwo. He had not yet found the language for how to be grateful for that, without sounding like a man who was grateful for another man's cruelty, which was not what he meant at all. What he meant was simpler and harder. He was glad she existed. He was glad he'd met her. He was glad she asked him questions that didn't have strategy in them. Wanting to be glad for things was new. It was the newest thing about him. The exhibition opened on a Friday night in late October. The gallery in Hongdae had been transformed. Seo Jin's team had handled the logistics, the lighting, the catering, the invitations to the right people in Seoul's art world, the press. But the work itself, the 7 paintings of the Displacement series, hung in the precise order Elizabeth had decided upon after 3 days of rearranging, was entirely hers. From the first dark canvas called Displacement to the largest, most devastating piece at the center of the far wall, What the Dark Remembers. Elizabeth wore burgundy, her hair up, a thin gold chain at her throat that Nanangozi had sent by international post, with a note that said only, "Wear this, and remember who made you." She stood near the entrance as guests arrived, and she accepted their responses to her work with grace. The praise, the confusion, the occasional person who stood in front of a painting for so long, she had to look away because witnessing someone be undone by something you made is almost too intimate to watch. Seo Jin arrived at 7:15. He walked in with Park Dojin and 2 other men who fanned out quietly and became part of the room's architecture. He was in black tonight. Shirt, trousers, sleeves slightly folded. He found her immediately across the room. He did not approach. He just looked at her with an expression that said, "I see this. I see what you made." And then he turned to the nearest painting and gave it his full attention, which was, Elizabeth was learning, the most sincere compliment he knew how to give. The disaster arrived at 8:45. She felt it before she saw it. That particular disturbance in a room's energy when someone has entered who has no right to be there. A shift in the air. A few people near the entrance whose body language suddenly changed. Then she saw Marcus Webb moving through her gallery. He looked good. He always looked good. That was part of what had worked. The effortless presentation, the warm smile, the way he occupied a room like he'd been invited specifically. He was wearing the navy jacket she'd once told him made him look like someone worth knowing. He made his way toward her through the crowd with the confidence of a man who had decided that showing up was the same as deserving to. She had about 4 seconds to decide who she was going to be in this moment. She chose herself. Elizabeth. He said her name like it was his, like the 16 months gave him access to it still. He leaned in like he might kiss her cheek, and she took one clean step back. Marcus. This is incredible, he said, gesturing at the gallery. I heard about it, and I had to come. I know things ended badly between us. Did they? Her voice was completely level. Because from where I'm standing, things ended very clearly. I just wasn't the one who ended them. His jaw tightened. I've been trying to reach you. I know. I blocked you. Elizabeth? Don't. She said it quietly. Not a shout, not a scene, but with a weight that made the word land exactly where she intended. Don't come to the thing I made from surviving you and ask me to make room for your comfort inside it. That is not something I owe you. I don't owe you anything, Marcus. Not access, not conversation, not forgiveness tonight in front of these people. I owe you nothing at all. Marcus's expression shifted. The warmth dropped off, and underneath it was something uglier. The face of a man who had expected tears and received steel and didn't know what to do with the difference. He stepped closer. You don't have to perform for... He stopped, because a hand had appeared at his shoulder. Not gripping, just present. The way a wall is present, the way something immovable makes itself known without violence. Kang Seojin's voice, when it came, was conversational. Polite, even. The most dangerous kind. She's asked you nothing, he said to Marcus. She's offered you nothing. And yet, here you are, taking up space in something she built. I'm going to need you to leave. A small pause. Or I can describe in some detail what your career in Seoul looks like once I make 3 phone calls in the morning. Your choice. But you should make it quickly because people are starting to look. Marcus looked at Seojin. He looked at Elizabeth. He was, she could see, running calculations, the kind men like Marcus always ran, weighing the cost of backing, down against the cost of not backing down, and arriving at the only conclusion a smart man could arrive at when Kang Seojin was the other option. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Elizabeth one more time, something complicated in his face, something that might have been genuine in another life. And then he walked back through the gallery and out the door. The room exhaled. Seojin did not make it a moment. He simply turned to the nearest passing waiter, took a glass of water, not champagne, water, and held it out to Elizabeth. She took it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. You had already handled it. I just held the door. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, surprising herself, surprising him, she laughed. Short and real and sudden, the kind of laugh that arrives when the body decides that relief needs to go somewhere. It had been, she realized, the first time she had laughed in over a month. He watched her with something in his expression that she was only now beginning to have the vocabulary to name. Later that night, after the last guests had filtered out and the caterers were quietly disassembling what remained, Elizabeth sat on the floor in the center of the room, with her shoes off and her back against the wall. Seojin sat beside her, not touching. Just beside, which was its own kind of closeness. Marcus used to tell me I was too much, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It just came. Too ambitious, too serious about my work, too particular about things that didn't matter. He had this way of framing everything I cared about as a flaw he was graciously overlooking. She paused. I didn't see it as erosion while it was happening. I saw it as love, as someone paying close enough attention to point out my edges. Seojin was quiet for a moment. The people who love you correctly, he said slowly, do not spend their time pointing out your edges. They make room for them. She turned to look at him in the half-dark gallery. That's very wise for someone who built an empire specifically, so no one could get close enough to see his edges. He almost smiled. I'm learning. I know, she said. I can tell. She leaned her head back against the wall and looked at the painting across the room, what the dark remembers, centered and large and overwhelming, the one that had started as a question and ended as something close to an answer. Do you know what I realized tonight? Standing in this room and seeing people be changed by something I made? I realized I spent the last 2 years making myself smaller because someone told me the room couldn't hold me at full size. And the whole time, she gestured around at the gallery, the room was never the problem. No, Seo-jin said, it wasn't. They sat in the silence of the gallery for a long time after that. The city went on outside, Seoul at night, all motion and light, and the 1,000 private dramas of 10 million people. In the gallery, just the two of them, the paintings, and something between them that was taking its time becoming what it was going to be. November came to Seoul in layers. First the color, the ginkgo trees going gold in Mapogu while Elizabeth painted her 8th canvas. Then the cold, moving in from the north with the particular conviction of a season that intended to stay. She wore Nanangozi's chain every day. She video called home every Sunday. She was not healing. She had never liked that word. The implication that damage was the natural state and wholeness was the goal. She was returning to herself, to the parts of herself that had always been there waiting patiently through 16 months of being loved incorrectly. Nanangozi asked about Seo-jin on the 4th Sunday call. She asked the way old women ask about things they've already decided they know about. Not a question, really, but an invitation to confirm what she'd already sensed. Elizabeth had mentioned him once, 2 weeks earlier, in passing. Nanangozi had filed it away. The Korean man, Nanangozi said. Tell me. Elizabeth laughed. There's nothing to tell, Nana. There's always something to tell. Your voice sounds different. Not happy different, yet, but open different. Open I know from before. She paused. Is he kind? Elizabeth thought about Seo-jin sitting at his grandmother's pojangmacha eating tteokbokki at 11 at night. Seo-jin asking what the water in her painting remembered. Seo-jin holding a glass of water out to her after the worst moment of the gallery opening, without making it about himself. He's trying to be, she said. I think for him that's the hardest thing he's ever done. Nanangozi said, which meant she approved, which meant she had already decided. On a Tuesday evening in mid-November, Elizabeth and Seo-jin sat across from each other at a small ramen restaurant in Mapogu, and he told her something he'd never told anyone. Not his lawyers, not Park Do-jin, not Ji-yeon in 7 years of marriage. He told her he was afraid, not of the Shin network, not of any external threat that he could strategize against. He was afraid, he said, quietly, looking at his bowl, afraid that he had spent so many years becoming something formidable that he had forgotten how to be something human, that the machinery of what he'd built was so efficient and so thorough that there was no longer a door in it that opened from the inside. He was afraid he had made himself permanently inaccessible, even to himself. And then, Elizabeth asked. He looked up. And then you asked me about the painting. She held his gaze. One question did all that? It wasn't the question, he said. It was that you expected an answer. A real one, not a deflection, not a performance. You just waited, like you genuinely believed I had something true to say. He shook his head slightly. I hadn't been waited on like that in years. I almost didn't know what to do with it. What did you do with it? She asked. I answered, he said, and I've been answering since. She reached across the table then, and tilted her bowl toward his side so their chopsticks could share, the small domestic intimacy of it landing between them like a declaration. He looked at it. He looked at her. And something in the set of his face, the careful, constructed composure, relaxed by degrees, like ice taking its time but taking it. They fell into a rhythm that neither of them named because naming it might have required a conversation about what it was, and what it was still becoming something, still deciding what shape it wanted to take. They met at Halmeoni's stall on Tuesday and Thursday nights. They walked along the Han River on Saturday mornings. He texted her articles about exhibitions she might find interesting. She sent him photographs of her paintings mid-process, before they were finished, which he seemed to understand was not a casual thing, that showing someone the unfinished version of anything was an act of trust. One Thursday night, he told her about his father. He didn't plan to. They were talking about something else, and then 10 minutes later, out of nowhere, he started talking about being 17 years old in Itaewon and watching his father make a desperate deal with people who did not understand the word mercy. He thought he was protecting us, Seo Jin said. His voice was flat, not emotionless, just careful. He wasn't. He was too afraid to ask for help from anyone who actually could have helped. So he went to the wrong people, and it ended the way it was always going to end. He paused. I decided that day that I would become someone the wrong people couldn't afford to touch. I built the empire for that reason. And then I built more of it because I didn't know how to stop. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. And now? Why do you keep building now? He looked at her. I'm starting to ask that question more, she nodded. It's a good one. He reached across the counter then, not for her hand, not quite, just close enough that his fingers were near hers in the orange light of the tent, and the space between them felt deliberate. I don't know how to do this, he said, and the admission cost him something. She could see it. What this is, I've been the person other people are careful around for so long I've forgotten how to just be in a room with someone. You're in a room with me? She said. I know. He looked at her. It's different. I know, she said. Halmeoni, from behind her pots, said something in Korean without looking at either of them. Seo Jin made a sound that might have been a laugh. What did she say? Elizabeth asked. She said the broth is better when people stop being stupid, he said. Elizabeth smiled. Smart woman. The smartest person I know, he said, and from the way he said it, she understood it was also the truest thing he'd said all evening. The Abuja offer came by email on a Wednesday morning in the first week of December. A foundation in Nigeria, one she had written to 18 months ago, before Seoul, before Marcus, before all of it, responding now to an inquiry she'd half forgotten sending, extending an invitation to bring the Displacement series to their new contemporary gallery space for a 6-week exhibition in the spring. Travel, accommodation, and production costs covered. Full creative control. Elizabeth read the email 4 times. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the middle of her studio with the 8 paintings around her and cried. Not from sadness. From the particular overwhelm of something you wanted so much and then gave up on arriving when you'd stopped looking for it. She called Adana first. Adana screamed so loudly Elizabeth had to hold the phone away from her ear. I knew, Adana kept saying. I knew, Elizabeth. I told you 6 years ago when you sent that first email that they would come around. Didn't I say? You said, Elizabeth confirmed, laughing. Are you going? Yes, Elizabeth said, and she knew it was true, even as she said it. Yes, of course I'm going. She told Seo Jin that same night over dinner, not at Halmeoni's stall this time, but at a small restaurant in Mapo-gu that they'd discovered 3 weeks earlier and quietly adopted as theirs. She told him the way you tell someone important news when you're not yet sure what the news means for everything else. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning his water glass in his hands. When? He asked. March. 6 weeks. He nodded slowly. Something moved across his face. Something she could now, after months of careful attention, read well enough to identify as the look of a man who is deciding how honest to be. He set the glass down. I want to tell you something, he said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. She folded her hands on the table. Okay. I have not wanted to be known by another person in a very long time, he said. I decided a long time ago that being known was a liability, that the more people understood about you, what you cared about, what you feared, what made you human, the more they had to use against you. So I made myself unknowable. I was very good at it. He paused. You are the first person in years who made me want to be less good at it. Elizabeth said nothing. She had promised. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. Going is right. Going is exactly what you should do. Your work deserves a buha. You deserve to take it home. But I want you to know... He stopped. Started again. I want you to know that I am someone different than the man you met on that rooftop. I'm still becoming that person. But I know what direction I'm going now. And that is because of you. Not for you. I'm not confused about the difference. Because of you. He looked at her directly. So go. And when you come back, if you come back... When? She said. The one word. Quiet. And certain. And she watched what it did to his face. Watched the thing that he almost never let anyone see happen in his expression. Something unguarded and unperformed and real. When, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say, I love you. They weren't there yet. They were building toward it slowly, the way you build anything that has to last, with attention and honesty and time. She said what was true instead. I see you, Seo-jin. She held his gaze. Not Kang Seo-jin of Park Industries. Not the most dangerous person in any room. You. I see you. And you are worth coming back to. He turned his hand over under hers. His fingers closed around her hand. And that was enough. That was everything. She flew out on a Thursday morning in late February, the city frosted over, the Han River gray, and still in the early light. Seo-jin drove her to the airport himself. No driver, no security, just him in a dark jacket and the comfortable silence that had become the sound of them together. They had said most of what needed saying the night before, at Halmeoni's stall. Halmeoni had made everything Elizabeth liked, the tteokbokki, the fish cake soup, a small plate of japchae she'd never seen on the regular menu and suspected had been made specifically for this night. The old woman hadn't said much. She kept refilling Elizabeth's bowl without being asked, which was its own kind of eloquence. When it was time to go, Halmeoni came around from behind the counter and she took Elizabeth's hands in both of hers. Her hands were small and rough and warm. She said something in Korean, low and direct, looking Elizabeth in the eye. Elizabeth looked at Seo-jin. What did she say? His voice was not entirely steady. She said, You are already family. Come back so we don't have to miss you. Too long. Elizabeth had managed, through everything, to keep herself together in the ways that mattered. She had not cried at the gala. She had not cried when she left Marcus's apartment. She had not cried at the gallery, but standing at Halmeoni's pojangmatcha with the old woman's rough, warm hands holding hers, she felt her eyes go bright and wet, and she did not fight it. Tell her, she started, then stopped, then tried again. Tell her I already know I'm coming back. The question is just how fast I can finish what I need to do, Seo-jin translated. Halmeoni listened. Then she patted Elizabeth's hands once, firmly, the way you pat something you trust, and went back behind her counter. At the airport, in the departures hall, Elizabeth and Seo-jin stood with her bags between them and the noise of the terminal around them like a river going past. Paint something true, he said. Always, she said. He didn't reach for her. She was the one who stepped forward. She put her hand against his jaw and looked at him one last time, memorizing the realness of him, the version of him that existed only in private. And then she kissed him once, brief and certain, and turned and walked towards security. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but because she already knew what she'd find, him standing exactly where she left him, watching her go, with the patient certainty of a man who has decided what he's waiting for. She thought about that patience on the plane, about what it meant, coming from a man who moved through the world the way Seo-jin moved through it, always in control, always the one setting the terms. Waiting for Seo-jin was perhaps the bravest thing he knew how to do. She thought about Marcus too. Not with bitterness. The bitterness had gone quiet, drained away somewhere in the months of painting, and the cold Mapogu mornings, and the Tuesday nights at Halmione's stall. What she felt when she thought of Marcus now was something closer to clarity. He had needed her to be smaller than she was. He had not been a monster. Monsters were simpler. He had been a frightened man who found in Elizabeth's size a threat, and in her love a tool. She did not forgive him exactly. She released him, which is different and harder and has nothing to do with him at all. She thought about the unfinished canvas rolled carefully in the tube in the overhead compartment, waiting. She thought about the way Seo-jin had said when instead of if. The smallest word, the most important one. She opened her sketchbook to a blank page. Outside the window, Seoul was falling away below her, the city she had moved to for a lie, and stayed in for the truth. She looked at the white page for a long time. Then she picked up her pencil and she began. The shape that appeared was not darkness this time. It was not displacement or grief or the anatomy of a wound. It was something with warmth in it, something that curved toward light, something she didn't have a name for yet, but recognized immediately in the way you recognize a feeling you've been waiting for your whole life. She would finish the painting in Abuja. She would hang it in the gallery beside the others. And standing in front of it on opening night with Adana on one side and Nanan Gozi, who had flown in from Houston, small and fierce, and smelling of shea butter and love, on the other, she would know what it was called. Beginning. Not despite everything that had happened. Because of it. Because the night the champagne glass shattered at her feet on a Seoul rooftop, a door opened, and she had been brave enough, or broken enough, which is sometimes the same thing, to walk through it. Elizabeth Okonkwo walked through it, and on the other side was everything she had always deserved. If this story moved you, if Elizabeth's journey hit somewhere real, subscribe right now and turn on your notifications because we are just getting started. Like this video so more people find it. And in the comments, what moment broke you the most? The champagne glass? The gallery? Or when instead of if? Tell me everything. I read every single one.